The Duluth community took a crude comment and turned it into a giving campaign for Minnesota Food Share Month.
Yeah, the inspiration, a recent Wall Street Journal article quoting Kathy Cargill, claiming Mayor Roger Reinert, quote, peed in his Cheerios. Northern News Now's Haley Asanovich has more.
Local Duluthians band together to turn Kathy Cargill's negative comment into a beneficial cause, all centered around a popular breakfast cereal. Billionaire Kathy Cargill has been scrutinized recently with her purchase of dozens of properties along Park Point. Residents of the point, along with Mayor Reinhardt, expressed concerns for the lack of transparency with her plan for the future. After her latest article with Wall Street Journal stating Mayor Reinhardt, quote, peed in his Cheerios, Duluth's Cheerio count skyrocketed. Her comments spurred a group of residents to create the Cheerio Challenge, taking to the media asking for anyone inclined to donate boxes of the heart-healthy snack. According to Cheerio Challenge organizer Kate Van Dale, in just 6 days, more than 800 Cheerio boxes were rounded up for the local nonprofits.
The response that we saw was just something that I think we would call very Duluthy. It really, I mean, between having people come with one box or firefighters showing up with dozen boxes, teachers donating $1,000 to benefit one of the organizations, this really was a community effort.
The campaign also raised $50,000, which will benefit Chum, the Salvation Army Duluth, the Union Gospel Mission, and Damiano Center. Executive Director Seth Currier from Damiano Center explains how essential these services are to his nonprofit.
Lately, we've been seeing between 95 and 150 people a day for breakfast alone, not including lunches or dinners. And so all of this cereal is going to go right to that, and it'll be really beautiful for people to be able to just eat however much they need.
Currier was not surprised by the turnout from his community, saying Duluth consistently comes together in support of the greater good, always looking for a cereal bowl half full. In Duluth, Haley Asanovich, Northern News Now.
And in addition to the media coverage, organizers of the challenge credit word of mouth and social media for the quick success of the campaign. Way to go to the community.